Welcome to page 7 of your linear equations packet. Today, we're going to be discussing slope. Let's start with a few basics before we jump into the story of Ski-Bird. On paper, draw a simple coordinate plane. Remember, this is our x-axis. As you get positive x coordinates, you will move to the right. And negative x coordinates, you'll move to the left, controlling your sideways movement. Your y-axis, well, that is the vertical axis running up and down. A positive y coordinate will go up, whereas a negative y coordinate will move you down. Now, the center, or the point of intersection, is the origin, 0, 0. Finally, when we number the quadrants, this is quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. It's tradition to use Roman numerals as we label the quadrants. Now graph these 3 lines on your coordinate plane. Your first line should have a y-intercept at 0. We're going to call this first line, line 1. Your second line should have a y-intercept of about a positive 2. We'll call this line number 2. And your third line should have a y-intercept of about a negative 4. Remember, the y-intercept is where that line crosses the y-axis, that nice vertical axis. And this line we will call line 3. As you look at each line, moving your eyes from left to right, you will notice that each of those purple lines, as you move from left to right with your eyes, travels uphill. That means those lines have a positive slope. We can tell line number 1 is proportional. It is straight, and it passes through the origin here at the x-axis. However, if you take a look at line number 2, it's straight, but it passes through at positive 2. So this is what we call a non-proportional linear equation. And the same is true for 3. We notice that it passes through at negative 4. Now it slopes uphill, it's positive, and it's straight, but it is a non-proportional linear equation. If we were to write an equation for each of these lines, we know the proportional equation would look something like this. K times x equals y. But if we were to write an equation for the 2 lines that are non-proportional, we would use the equation mx plus or minus b equals y, where the m represents your slope, and in this case, it would be a positive slope, and your b represents your y-intercept. Now make sure you've taken down all these notes. Pause the video if you need a little extra time. Then start the video when you're ready. In your notes, draw another coordinate plane. And sketch a line sloping upward. Remember, as we look at this moving left to right, this line is traveling uphill. Make that line cross the y-axis at about a -3. Remember, this y-axis, this vertical axis, is very important because this spot right here is known as our y-intercept. And that becomes very important when we go to write an equation for line 1. Now let's take a look at the slope of this line. Remember, the letter M stands for slope. And we know that's a ratio of rise, or delta y, over delta x, the run. Rise over run. This is a very important ratio, and this represents our rate of change, our slope, and there's a variety of other terms that refer to this ratio. How do we calculate this ratio? Well, we start at the point furthest to the left on the line of solutions. First, we're going to either travel up or down, and secondly, we'll move to the right. Place your pencil point on this point on the line that is furthest to the left. First, go up, let's say 2 units. Moving upward, that's +2. To the right 2 units, that's a +2. Up 2 over 2, up 2 over 2, up 2 over 2. That is your slope, or your rate of change. A +2 over a +2, which reduces to 1 over 1, which is an M value, or a slope of 1. So as I go to write the equation for this particular blue line, line 1, we would use mx plus b equals y as our guide to set up this equation. Our m, our slope, can be found here. We know it's positive because we travel uphill. +1 times x. Now our intercept is a -3 equals y. And this is the equation for this particular blue line. But what happens if our line travels downhill rather than uphill as we move left to right? Draw the pink line sloping downward as your eyes move from left to right. We're going to label this line 2, and our y-intercept is still -3. So, in order to write an equation for this particular line, we see we're going to have to calculate the slope. Remember, we're going to use mx plus b equals y as we write the equation for this line. Well, we already know our intercept is a -3. That's true. But what about this slope? In this case, the line is sloping downward as we move left to right. This will have a negative slope. Let's take a look. Place your pencil point on the point furthest to the left, the first readable point to the left. Now remember, when we calculate slope, it's delta y first and delta x second. So that up and down movement must occur first. As we go down 2 units, that's a -2. But movement to the right, that's a +2. Down 2 to the right 2. down 2 to the right 2. This, of course, this negative 2 moving downward is your delta y, and this positive 2 is your delta x. So as we set up this very important ratio, it's negative 2 over positive 2, which reduces to negative 1 over positive 1, which is simply a slope of negative 1. This negative slope indicates this downward or downhill pitch. So as we write the equation for this, negative 1x minus 3, which is our intercept, equals y. Now, there are two other cases we have to consider, which we haven't dealt with yet. As we read the story of Ski-Bird, you'll also see what happens if a line is horizontal and what happens if a line runs straight up and down and is vertical. So really, these are the two main cases, line 1 and line 2, where you have either a positive slope or a negative slope. But your third and fourth case are a few exceptions that show up once in a while. Let's take a look at Ski-Bird. If you have a home printer, you can print off this page and take notes. But take a look at the proportional line here where Ski-Bird travels uphill from left to right. This is known as a positive slope. But as Ski-Bird travels downhill, as your eyes move left to right, this is a negative slope. And here are our two special cases. If the line runs side to side and it is horizontal, please take this down in your notes. It has what is called a zero slope. So if I were to write this equation, I think the intercept is about at a negative 1. We know we would use this as our guide. It would have zero slope minus 1 as the intercept equals y. If we clean this up, 0 times x is simply 0. So the equation would be negative 1 equals y. So running horizontal, that's a zero slope. And what if you're running straight up and down, like this one? Well, first of all, this is a vertical line. It runs north and south. If you happen to get a line like this, this is what we call an undefined slope or no slope. Please make a note of these 4 cases in your notebook. Let's get ready to put your skills to the test. Move on to page 8.